You might expect that the prices of things that seem related, maybe even coming from the same place, would generally move together.
Yeah, that seems logical on the surface.
But sometimes the actual forces at play push their prices in completely different directions. It can be quite surprising.
It's a classic economic puzzle, really, and it often requires looking, beyond those surface appearances to understand what's actually going on.
Okay, well, let's unpack this then. Today, we're diving into a specific example right here in the U.S. We're looking at the prices of boneless chicken breasts and a dozen eggs.
And for this, we're leaning on some great insights from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, their FRED database, and the FRED blog. They've analyzed data that originally comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, stuff collected for the Consumer Price Index.
So our mission here is to figure out why, even though, well, they both come from chickens, their average price movements can be so different. It's actually a perfect way to look at some core economic ideas in action.
Yeah, and the observation that really kicked this off, the one highlighted in the FRED blog, is this recent, pretty stark increase in egg prices,
Right.
especially when you contrast that with boneless chicken breast prices, which have been, well, relatively stable. If you're just starting to look at markets, you might scratch your head a bit.
Absolutely. Why wouldn't they track each other? They're both chicken products.
So the blog digs into this using a couple of fundamental economic concepts: substitutes and complements.
Exactly. These are really key ideas. So economists talk about goods being substitutes if basically consumers can easily use one instead of the other.
Like maybe orange juice and apple juice for breakfast. If one gets pricey, you grab the other.
Precisely. And the reason this substitute idea matters for prices is all about demand. If, say, orange juice prices shoot up, people tend to buy less orange juice and more apple juice.
Ah, so the demand for apple juice increases. Its demand curve shifts out to the right.
Exactly, which then puts upward pressure on the price of apple juice too. So
Mhm.
you often see prices of good substitutes kind of moving in tandem. Okay, that makes sense for substitutes.
Right.
What about complements then?
Right. Complements are different. These are goods you typically use together. The classic example is maybe gasoline and cars or burgers and buns.
Got it. So how does that affect prices?
Well, think about it. If the price of gasoline goes way up, people might drive less, maybe even buy fewer cars, right?
Okay.
So the higher price of gas could actually decrease the demand for cars, shifting the car demand curve to the left. This would put downward pressure on car prices, potentially. It's about that linked usage.
Interesting. So complements might see prices move in opposite directions sometimes because of that demand link.
Yeah.
Okay. So how does this apply to chicken and eggs, according to the FRED analysis?
Well, the blog looked at this. First, are they substitutes? And the conclusion was, not really. Not in consumption anyway. You don't often swap a chicken breast for an egg in the same meal?
No, not typically.
And maybe surprisingly, not really in production either, because modern farming is so specialized. We'll get to that.
Okay, so not strong substitutes. What about complements? Are they used together?
Again, the source suggests not really in consumption. I mean, how many common recipes call for both chicken breast and eggs in large amounts? Not that many, really.
True.
And crucially, while you might intuitively think, well, a chicken gives meat and eggs, the blog points out modern farming just doesn't work like that anymore. They're not production complements in practice today.
Oh, okay, so this is where it gets really interesting then. If they aren't strong substitutes or strong complements in the usual economic sense.
Exactly. Then those typical demand-side links that often tie prices together just aren't that strong here. Their prices aren't necessarily bound to move together.
So what is the reason for the price difference then? The blog points to something else.
Yes, it comes down to the structure of the industry. Modern chicken farming is incredibly specialized. You have chickens bred and raised specifically for meat.
Those are the broilers, right?
Correct. Broilers. They grow incredibly fast, ready for market in just a few weeks. And then you have entirely different breeds of chickens, the laying hens, which are optimized just for egg production.
And they live longer.
Much longer, yes, years sometimes. They're managed completely differently.
And that specialization, that makes them vulnerable to different things.
Precisely. The blog highlights how diseases, specifically the recent avian flu epidemic, have hit the laying hen population much harder than the broilers.
Why is that?
Because the laying hens live longer, they just have more time and exposure, making them more susceptible to these kinds of outbreaks. And when an outbreak hits those flocks, it takes a really long time to replace those specialized birds and get egg production levels back up. It's a major shock to the supply of laying hens.
Which directly reduces the supply of eggs.
Exactly. Simple supply and demand. If the supply curve shifts significantly inwards like that and demand stays roughly the same.
Prices go up. Sharply in this case. That explains the egg price surge.
Right. Meanwhile, the broiler chickens, the meat birds, have that very short life cycle. They're turned over quickly.
So they're less exposed to the same long-term disease impact, and the supply chain can recover much faster if there's an issue.
Generally, yes. They haven't faced the same severity of supply shock from this particular issue. So the supply of chicken meat has remained relatively stable compared to eggs.
And with a stable supply, boneless chicken breast prices haven't faced that same dramatic upward pressure.
Wow. It's a really clear example of how production specifics can override what you might initially expect based on the source animal.
It really is. And the data they use, just mention it, comes from those monthly average consumer prices the BLS collects for the CPI.
Right. Specific things like boneless, skinless chicken breast and large white grade A eggs.
Yeah. And the blog notes that while index values are usually better for tracking change over time, these average prices clearly show the different price levels and the divergent movements we've been discussing. You can literally see it in the price charts. So pulling it all together, this deep dive really shows us something important. Those core economic concepts, substitutes, complements, supply and demand, they're fundamental, absolutely.
But you always have to layer on the real-world context.
Exactly. Things like how industries are structured, specialized production, unexpected shocks like disease outbreaks. These can completely change the story the prices tell, even for products that seem closely related, like chicken and eggs.
It definitely underscores the need to look beyond the basics, which actually raises a broader question for you to think about. Well, we've just seen how specialization sort of broke that expected link between chicken meat and eggs. Can you think of other goods out there that might seem related at first glance, but because of how they're made or how we use them today, their prices actually, march to the beat of their own drum?
That's a great question. Something definitely worth pondering as you look at prices in the world around you using these economic tools we talked about today.